They laughed when she stepped off the helicopter. 19. Too young. Too quiet. And that rifle? Not standard issue, longer, heavier, almost outdated. A relic in a unit that trusted only precision and tech. The desert heat shimmered like a mirage as the Navy SEALs team prepared for a high-risk extraction deep behind enemy lines. "Stay back," one of them muttered. Then the radio went dead, and from miles away, hidden beneath waves of burning sand and wind, she took one shot. Seconds later, the ambush collapsed, and no one laughed again. The helicopter touched down at 0430 hours, and the desert was already burning. Not the way fire burns. The way stone does, slow, patient, absolute. The air above the sand shimmered in tight waves, even before sunrise, a trembling distortion that bent every horizon into something unreliable. Sergeant Marcus Hale had been on 4 deployments across 3 continents. He knew what this kind of heat did to men. It made them stupid. It made them slow. It made them make mistakes. He was standing beside the transport bird with his arms crossed when she stepped down. She was carrying a hard case, matte black, longer than most. The kind of case that announced itself before the person carrying it did. She wore her gear clean and tight, nothing loose, nothing sloppy, brown hair pulled back, eyes already scanning not the team, not Marcus, but the tree line to the east, the ridge to the north, the dust pattern in the air above the far dunes. She wasn't looking at them at all. That bothered him more than the rifle case. "Harder," he said flatly. "Sir." She set the case down beside her boot without being told. Stood at attention, but not rigidly. The kind of attention that had been practiced so many times it became something else entirely. Something quieter. Behind him, 2 of his men exchanged a glance. Devlin, the team's current designated marksman, tilted his head and looked at the case. He was 26. He'd been shooting competitively since he was 12. He had 4 confirmed kills at ranges above 1,000 meters. He was not the kind of man who was easily impressed, and he wore that fact openly. Behind Devlin stood Rourke, who was the team's breacher and occupied roughly the same physical footprint as a refrigerator. Rourke had said approximately 47 words in Marcus's presence over the past 3 months, which Marcus had come to understand was not unfriendliness but simply the way Rourke processed the world through his hands, through thresholds and mechanisms and problems that could be taken apart and solved. He looked at Emily Carter the way he looked at everything, assessing load-bearing capacity. And beside Rourke stood Davis, 24, who was good in a firefight and sometimes too good at finding reasons to be worried about things, which was an asset in planning and a liability when the plan was already committed. Davis looked at Emily and then looked at Marcus, and the look was a question Marcus didn't answer. The rest of the team was already inside. 6 total, plus Marcus, plus the girl with the rifle case. 8 was the right number for this op. Marcus was not happy about it. "Is that a Remington 700? He asked. "Modified," Emily Carter said. "Modified." He said it like a punchline. "What's the base config?" "Long action. Custom chamber. 28-inch barrel." Devlin turned away before she finished. Not rudely, he didn't bother with the performance of rudeness. He simply stopped listening, the way you stop listening to something that doesn't have anything to tell you. Marcus watched this without commenting. He had read her file. 19 years old. Completed the basic SOTA qualification at the top of her cohort. No combat deployments. 1 field assessment in a non-hostile zone, which apparently she'd also topped. The evaluating officer's notes were unusual. Candidate exhibits an unusual capacity for environmental reading. Recommend fast track to Overwatch integration. It was the word unusual that had caught him. Not exceptional. Not outstanding. Unusual. He filed it somewhere in the back of his mind and moved on. "Briefing in 5 minutes, he said, and turned back toward the operations shelter. Emily Carter picked up her case and followed, still not looking at the team. Still scanning the east ridge, the north, the trembling air above the dunes. Inside the shelter, the team gathered around a table that held a topographic display and a series of photographs. 7 operators including Marcus. Emily Carter made 8. She stood at the edge of the group and said nothing. Marcus laid out the mission with the practiced economy of someone who had done this too many times to waste words on it. A detained American contractor civilian, non-combatant, was being held approximately 42 kilometers northeast in a compound near a dried riverbed. Intelligence had placed him there within the last 18 hours. The window was narrow. The extraction route ran through 3 kilometers of open terrain before hitting the compound's perimeter. Cover was minimal. The op was designed for speed. Get in, pull the asset, get out before any opposing force could organize. "Threat assessment?" asked Rourke, the team's breacher. He was the biggest man in the room and had a way of asking questions that made them sound like accusations. "Elevated," Marcus said. 3 separate sources have flagged unusual movement in the area over the last 48 hours. Nothing confirmed, but nothing we're ignoring. "And her?" Devlin asked. He didn't look at Emily when he said it. "Overwatch. 3 kilometers east on the ridgeline." Marcus tapped the map. "She holds position. She watches. If we hit trouble, she's our last line." Devlin made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 3 kilometers. "That's the position," Marcus said. "Effective range of that antique is what? maybe 2,000 meters on a good day with clean air, Devlin said. In this heat, with thermals and wind shear, I know the position, Emily said quietly. The room went slightly still. Devlin turned to look at her for the first time. You've never been in theater before? No. Then you don't know what this heat does to a bullet at that range. She met his gaze without blinking. The air density at this altitude and temperature drops the trajectory by approximately 4 to 6 inches per 100 meters at ranges above 2,000. The thermals above the sand will increase that deviation by a variable I'll calculate on-site based on the morning's wind pattern. The Coriolis effect at this latitude adds roughly. Okay, Marcus said. Not dismissively, just he'd heard enough to file it. Emily stopped. Devlin looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to the map. Nobody laughed, but nobody said anything either. The silence was its own kind of judgment, and Emily Carter had been inside that kind of silence long enough to know exactly what it meant. She looked at the map. She memorized the ridge line. She noted the direction of the prevailing wind markers in the upper corner of the topographic display. Outside, the desert kept burning. She'd learned to shoot before she could ride a bicycle, not because her father was reckless or careless with firearms, the opposite. Colonel Raymond Carter, retired, had been the most methodical man Emily had ever known. He approached everything the way he approached a long-range shot, with patience, with precision, with a complete absence of ego. Ego, he used to say, is the thing that makes you miss. It makes you hurry. It makes you think you already know the answer before you've asked the question. He'd handed her a rifle when she was 7. A .22, bolt action, light enough that she could hold it properly if she planted her elbows right and breathed from her diaphragm. They'd spent 3 hours that first session and fired exactly 4 rounds. 1 to understand the trigger, 1 to understand the breath, 1 to understand the wind, 1 to try to put it all together. She'd hit the target on the 4th shot. He hadn't congratulated her. He'd said, "That's the beginning. Everything else is just finding out how much you still have to learn." That was Raymond Carter. He'd been the longest confirmed kill shooter in his unit's history for 11 years before a roadside device took his left hand and most of the hearing in his right ear. He came home with a Purple Heart, a medical discharge, and a silence that filled the house like weather. He didn't talk about the war. He didn't talk about the shot. What he did was take his daughter to the range every Saturday and teach her the only language he'd ever fully trusted: wind, distance, breath. He never used rangefinders. He distrusted laser systems the way some men distrust politicians, not because the technology was untrustworthy, but because dependence on it made you untrustworthy. The wind changes, he used to say. The laser doesn't know that. You have to know that. Emily had inherited his eyes and his patience and none of his silence. She talked, when she talked, in the quick-clipped way of someone who'd spent years thinking before speaking. She was not unfriendly. She was not cold. She was simply precise. She said what she meant and not much more. She had tried to explain this to the Army recruiter who'd asked her to characterize herself. He'd written down reserved and moved on. What he hadn't written down, what she hadn't offered, was the rest of it. The part where she was 17 and had lain in a prone position for 6 hours in the Sonoran Desert in July, tracking a single target marker across shifting thermals, adjusting her hold every 20 minutes as the heat built and changed and rebuilt the entire geometry of the shot. The part where she'd missed, badly, by her standards, 18 inches left, and her father had watched through his spotting scope and said nothing for 30 seconds, and then had said, "Good, now do it again. This time, listen to what the miss told you." She'd fired 11 more rounds that afternoon. The last 7 had hit center mass. What the Army recruiter also hadn't written down was the competition record, which was partly her doing and partly a deliberate choice not to enter certain events where the scrutiny would attract attention. She'd competed under a variation of her name, E.R. Carter, the middle initial standing for nothing in particular, just a buffer in regional precision shooting circuits from the time she was 15. She had not lost a long-range event since she was 16 years old. The margin by which she won was usually significant enough to be uncomfortable for the organizers, who were generally middle-aged men who found themselves in the awkward position of handing a trophy to someone who hadn't yet sat for her SATs. She hadn't done it for the trophies. She'd done it for the calibration. Her father's method was built on volume, not the volume of rounds fired, but the volume of conditions encountered. You had to shoot in heat and cold and rain and crosswind and no wind and variable wind. You had to shoot when you were tired and when you were nervous and when the target was unclear. You had to build a library of decisions so complete that in any given moment, your body could consult it faster than your conscious mind could formulate a question. Muscle memory was the wrong term for it. It was something deeper. Condition memory. The knowledge of how a specific air temperature felt against your trigger finger, and what that meant for the trigger pull. The knowledge of how a mirage shimmer looked 1 minute before a thermal gust, which was different from how it looked 1 minute after. Raymond Carter had spent 11 years building that library. He'd given her 20 years to build hers, and she was only getting started. She had tried to explain this to the Army recruiter, who'd asked her to characterize herself. He'd written down, reserved, and moved on. Now she sat behind the ridge, 3 kilometers from the extraction zone, and set up her position with the deliberateness her father had given her. She found the hollow first, a natural depression in the rock that offered concealment without compression. She tested the ground beneath her elbows, felt for loose stone, adjusted by 2 inches. She built her pack beneath the rifle stocks so the angle of the barrel matched the calculated drop point for the extraction zone. Then she waited. The wind came from the northwest at this hour. Light. 7 to 10 kilometers per hour. The thermals above the sand were beginning to build as the sun climbed, and she watched them through her scope, reading them the way her father had taught her, not as interference, but as information. The heat shimmer was not the enemy, it was the message. You just had to understand what it was saying. She adjusted her dope sheet. The notebook was soft cover, the pages slightly worn. She updated her wind call, her estimated density altitude, the current temperature against the barrel temperature from the morning shade. Her handwriting was small and exact. Down in the extraction zone, the SEALs were moving into position. She found Marcus first, then Devlin, then the others. She tracked them with the calm attention of someone who had been watching people move through difficult terrain her entire life. Something in the wind changed. She noticed it at 0613 hours. The extraction zone was a dried riverbed flanked on both sides by low broken rock formations that the maps labeled as irregular terrain and that Rourke called, more precisely, a hell of a place to get caught. Marcus moved the team in a staggered formation, pairs with 30-meter spacing, Devlin on point. The GPS was giving clean signal for now, but Marcus had been in enough deteriorating communications environments to know that clean signal was a temporary condition, not a promise. The compound was visible from 2 kilometers out, low walls, whitewashed once, and now the color of the sand around them. A single vehicle parked on the south side. Satellite imagery had shown it stationary for 22 hours. That was either a very confident enemy position or an abandoned one, and Marcus had been doing this long enough to know that when the enemy was very confident, they had reason to be. He keyed his radio. Carter, confirm position. Confirmed. I have eyes on the compound. South vehicle is occupied. I can see thermal bloom from the engine. It ran within the last 3 hours. Marcus processed that. Any movement on the perimeter? Nothing visible. But the wind is doing something strange on the east face of the ridge. Define strange. A pause. It reversed. Briefly. Then corrected. It's another pause. I'm not sure what's causing it yet. Keep watching. He moved his hand forward. The team continued. Marcus had been running operations like this for 7 years. He knew the feeling that was building in the back of his chest, not fear. Exactly. Fear was too simple a word for it. It was more like the awareness of a pattern beginning to form in his peripheral vision, like recognizing the early notes of a melody you've heard before and don't want to hear again. He'd been in 3 ambushes. He'd walked into one. The other 2 he'd felt coming. The way you feel weather, not with specific data, but with a kind of whole-body sensitivity to the shape of things. He trusted that feeling both times, and it had kept his people alive. He was feeling it now. The problem was that he had no specific data to justify a route change, and changing routes without specific data was the kind of decision that got people killed a different way, by abandoning a covered approach for an uncovered one, by sacrificing the known risks for the unknown ones. Operations planning wasn't poetry. You moved on data. You moved on analysis. Carter's voice in his ear. The wind reversed. He turned the phrase over in his head. He didn't know what to do with it yet. He kept moving. Corporal Davis, moving on Marcus's left, fell into step beside him at the next interval. Davis was 24 and had been with the team for 14 months. He was steady under fire and uncomfortable with uncertainty, which in Marcus's experience made him both an excellent soldier and an occasionally brittle one. You buy what she said? Davis asked quietly. About the wind? About any of it? Marcus didn't answer right away. He had read the evaluation notes again this morning. Unusual capacity for environmental reading. The evaluating officer's name was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Brennan, who had been running SODIC assessments for 9 years. She was not a woman who used words carelessly. She's here because someone who knows what they're doing sent her here, Marcus said. That's enough for now. Davis didn't look convinced, but he stopped asking. At 0634, the GPS faltered. The signal degraded from 4 bars to 1 in the space of 30 seconds, then recovered, then dropped completely. Marcus checked his backup, same result. He switched to compass and called the coordinate off the last known fix. Comms? He asked. Spotty. Reeves, his communications man, said. I'm getting interference I can't account for. Broadband, not targeted. Natural? Maybe. Heat could be bouncing it off the rock face. He didn't sound certain. Carter, Marcus said. You still have us? Still have you, came her voice. Calm, steady. You're approximately 400 meters from the compound's southwest corner. There's a depression in the terrain at your 11 o'clock. It'll give you cover to within 150 of the wall. Topi. Answered. Go. Someone's been very careful about the sand near the eastern approach. The dune pattern doesn't match the wind history. Something moved through there recently, and they tried to cover it. Marcus stopped walking for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, noted, and kept moving. Behind him, he heard Devlin murmur something under his breath. He didn't ask what it was. Emily Carter had been taught that the desert tells you everything if you know how to listen. Her father had said this on a Saturday afternoon in the Mojave, when she was 11 years old, and she hadn't fully understood it until she was 16 and spending 2 weeks at an advanced marksmanship camp in the Sonoran, lying in the sand for hours at a time, watching wind patterns move across a landscape that looked completely still. The desert was never still. That was the thing people didn't understand. Every surface in a desert environment was in constant, subtle motion: the sand, the air above it, the thermals rising from dark rock, the shadows cast by distant ridge lines that told you the angle of the sun and therefore the time and therefore how the wind was likely to shift in the next 40 minutes. It was, her father had said, like reading a language. She was reading it now. The wind reversal she'd reported to Marcus at 0621 had lasted approximately 4 seconds. In open desert, wind reversals at this scale happened when a large warm mass disturbed the boundary layer, usually a vehicle, or a group of people in close formation, or heated equipment generating its own convective column. There was no vehicle on the east face of the ridge. She checked. There was no visible equipment, which meant people. She scanned the eastern approach through her scope in a slow, patient grid, methodical, left to right, near to far, accounting for shimmer. She was looking for something that didn't move the way sand moved, something that sat fractionally different from its surroundings. It took her 6 minutes. There, approximately 2/3 up the eastern ridge face, a position that had been constructed with genuine skill. Whoever had chosen it understood shadow angles, understood how to use the rock formation for concealment, but the sand around the lower edge of the position was slightly darker, which meant it had been disturbed recently and not yet fully dried, and the shadow line didn't fall quite right. There was a subtle protrusion at the eastern edge that didn't match the rock profile. A rifle barrel. She felt the certainty arrived the way all certainties arrived for her, quietly, without fanfare, simply present. "Hail," she said. "Go." There is a sniper on the east ridge face, approximately 160 meters above the extraction zone floor. He has a firing line on your current approach path. A pause that lasted 4 seconds. Then, confirm. High confidence. The shadow pattern doesn't match the formation. The sand disturbance is fresh, and there's a barrel outline at the position's lower right edge. Another pause. Longer. "Devlin," Marcus said on the team channel. "Thoughts?" "I can't see the position from here," Devlin said. "The angle's wrong." "Carter," Marcus said. "Can you take the position?" She'd already done the math. Range to the East Ridge sniper position, 2,840 meters. Wind currently running northwest at approximately 9 kilometers per hour, with the reversed gust anomaly suggesting a secondary crosswind component from the east at the compound level. Temperature at her position, 41 degrees Celsius. The barrel had been in morning shade until 6 minutes ago. "Yes," she said. "Hold," Marcus said. "We're not confirmed hostile yet. Don't fire unless..." The RPG team opened up from the south. It happened in the space of a breath. One moment, the extraction zone was hot and quiet and manageable. The next, it wasn't. The first burst of automatic fire came from the southwest corner of the compound, raking across the open sand at 40 meters in front of the team's point element. Not close enough to be accurate, close enough to be deliberate, driving them right, away from the depression, into the open ground between the two rock formations. "Contact southwest," Devlin's voice. Flat, immediate. "Cover right, cover right." Marcus moved the team hard toward the eastern rock, which was exactly where they were being pushed. Emily saw it from the ridge. She saw the geometry of it, the way her father had taught her to see geometry, not as a collection of individual elements, but as a system. The southwest fire was a funnel. The eastern rock formation was the walls of the funnel. And at the end of the funnel, "Hail, stop. Do not move to the eastern rock. We're taking fire. The eastern rock is the kill zone. There are at least 2 shooters on the north face of that formation. The compound fire is driving you toward them." The sound of gunfire. Then a brief silence that felt like held breath. "Copy," Marcus said. His voice was different now, not tight-focused. "Alternative? The depression at your 11 o'clock. You passed it 50 meters back. It's not in any direct firing line from the compound, the eastern formation, or the ridge sniper. That's 50 meters of open ground." "Yes." "With incoming from 2 directions." "Yes." A pause. Gunfire again, closer, then a burst from Rourke's weapon returning fire. The engagement was 3 seconds old and already chaotic. "Carter," Marcus said. "The ridge sniper. Where is he?" "Still in position. He hasn't fired. He's waiting for you to move into his lane. Can you take him now?" "Yes." "Do it." She was already on him. The target was behind cover. She could see approximately 40% of his upper body through a gap in the rock formation. He was wearing desert camouflage, a helmet, goggles. He had an eye to his scope. He was patient. He was professional. He was waiting for the moment the SEALs broke cover and ran, which would be the predictable thing to do under the incoming fire they were taking. He never considered the possibility that someone was watching him from 2,840 meters away. She didn't blame him. It wasn't a reasonable possibility. She exhaled halfway. She let the crosshairs settle. The wind was currently 3 kilometers per hour more than her last reading. She held a $250,000 into the wind component. She blinked. She stopped blinking. She pressed the trigger. The thing no one who hasn't done it can fully understand is the silence. You fire the shot, and then there is nothing you can do. You cannot guide it. You cannot correct it. You cannot call it back. The bullet leaves the barrel and enters a world of forces that you have done your best to calculate. And then it is entirely on its own, traveling through air that is shifting and hot and fundamentally indifferent to your intentions. At 2,840 meters, the flight time is approximately 2.8 seconds. Emily Carter did not watch through her scope during those 2.8 seconds. She kept her eyes open. She controlled her breathing. She felt the residual vibration of the trigger brake drain out of her fingertips. She had fired the shot she had calculated she could make. Whether she had made it would be resolved in 2.8 seconds. The rifle her father had given her, the actual rifle, the one she'd inherited after his second stroke grounded him for good, was a Macmillan TAC 50 action married to a custom long-action bolt body that a gunsmith in Flagstaff had spent 3 weeks building to Raymond Carter's exacting specifications. It was not the most modern system. It was not the most technologically sophisticated system. It did not have an integrated wind-reading computer or a smart scope or any of the digital integration that the current generation of military precision rifles carried. What it had was a trigger pull of exactly 2.3 pounds, consistent to within half an ounce across every condition Emily had ever tested. What it had was a barrel that had been broken in over 600 rounds until it shot with a consistency that the Flagstaff gunsmith had called, quietly, disturbing. What it had was her father's history in it. 11 confirmed kills at ranges that had made people uncomfortable. A record that had stood for 9 years before a device in a road took the hand that had built it. She had her mother's eyes and her father's hands. She felt the answer arrive before she could see it confirm. The Eastridge sniper was removed from the equation at 0641 hours and 42 seconds. Emily did not pause to process it. She was already moving the scope. The RPG team was the priority. She'd identified them 30 seconds before the ambush triggered 2 men behind a low berm at the southeastern edge of the compound wall, approximately 90 meters from the main gate. One was the launcher, one was the loader. They had not yet deployed because the compound fire hadn't yet achieved the intended effect. The SEALs had not been driven into the funnel. They were still behind cover, still dangerous, still unpredictable. That window was closing. Range to the RPG team, 3,180 meters. She adjusted. The loader was in a marginally better firing position from her angle. She chose the launcher. One-shot removal of the man with the weapon rather than the man with the ammunition was basic triage. It was possible for a determined enemy to pick up a dropped launcher and continue the engagement. It was not possible for a man with a launcher and no trained partner to effectively sustain the threat. Wind had shifted again. Back to northwest. Stronger, she estimated 12 kilometers per hour now, with a slight gust variance every 30 to 40 seconds. The thermals between her and the target were the worst variable. At this range, thermal refraction could push a bullet 2 to 3 feet off course in the final 500 meters of flight. She watched the thermals. She timed the gusts. She watched the air above the sand for the particular shimmer pattern that indicated a lull in the convective column, a brief window, usually 3 to 5 seconds, when the thermal interference dropped. 40 seconds passed. The thing about waiting at extreme range is that it requires a specific quality of stillness that most shooters never develop because they never need it. Inside 1,000 meters, the wind changes don't compound the way they do at distance. A gust that adds 3 inches of drift at 800 meters adds 22 inches at 3,000. The math is unforgiving, but the math also tells you precisely when not to shoot and equally when the window is there. Emily had been taught to feel this, not calculated in real time. Though she could do that too, her father's insistence on working without computers had built in her a parallel processing capability that operated below the level of conscious thought. She watched the thermals and her body was already adjusting shoulder tension, trigger pressure, the minute rotation of her wrist before her mind had finished formulating the decision. Her heartbeat was 44 beats per minute. She controlled it the way she controlled everything, through breath. Below her, she heard gunfire. She did not rush. The window came. She pressed the trigger. Flight time at 3,180 meters. Approximately 3.1 seconds. During those 3.1 seconds, Marcus Hale was moving his team from one piece of cover to another in controlled bounds, taking fire from 2 positions and returning fire from 4. Devlin had taken a graze across the left forearm, not serious, bleeding freely. Rourke had disabled one of the compound side shooters with a burst that had been, by any accounting, exceptional shooting under stress. Davis was on the radio trying to re-establish any connection to base, and the radio was telling him nothing. Marcus had the sensation, familiar from bad deployments, that the geometry of the situation was about to go from manageable to unmanageable. The RPG team behind the berm was the pivot point. If they fired, the dynamics of the engagement changed catastrophically. If they didn't fire, if something delayed them, disrupted them, eliminated them, there was still a path through. He was calculating that path when he heard the sound. Not a shot, you don't hear the shot that kills you. What he heard was the absence of what he'd been anticipating. He'd been braced for the RPG launch, the distinctive hollow thump of propellant, the trail of smoke. He'd been running the probable trajectories in his peripheral processing. Instead, nothing. Then Devlin's voice, sharp and different from how it had been. RPG team is down. Both of them. I do not see a shot angle. Where did that come from? Marcus looked at the berm. Both men were down. The launcher was in the sand. Nobody on the team had a firing angle on that position. Nobody on the team was at a range that— Harder, he said. Yes, sir. Was that you? A pause. The RPG position? Yes. Range? Approximately 3,180. The radio was silent for 2 full seconds. Copy, Marcus said. He moved the team. The ambush did not unravel dramatically. It unraveled the way well-constructed things unravel when a load-bearing element is removed, systematically, with a kind of structural inevitability. The RPG team had been the coordination anchor. Their removal broke the timing. The compound fire, which had been methodical and organized, became reactive. The shooters on the eastern formation who had been waiting for the funnel to deliver their target now had no clear engagement solution and no clear command structure. Marcus ran the team through the gap. It was 40 meters of open ground. It took 12 seconds. In those 12 seconds, Emily Carter neutralized 2 additional firing positions, one on the north face of the eastern rock formation, one on the compound's roof and tracked, but did not engage a third shooter who broke from the compound's east gate and ran north. Range on that target, 2,400 meters, moving. She calculated the solution, held for 2 seconds, then released the trigger without firing. She had not confirmed hostile status on that individual. The man was running away. Her father's voice, from a training session 12 years ago. You are not a weapon. You are a decision. Be careful what decisions you make. She didn't fire. The team reached the depression and used it. Marcus had 2 shooters laying cover to the south, while the rest broke toward the compound's now weakened northwest corner. Rourke breached the gate in 40 seconds. The contractor, a civilian analyst named Gregory Watts, 43 years old, dehydrated but ambulatory, was found in the 3rd room on the left. The entire contact phase lasted 11 minutes. Emily maintained her position for 30 minutes after the team entered the compound. She watched the perimeter. She watched the terrain. She updated her wind call every 10 minutes and adjusted her dope sheet in the small, precise handwriting that always looked slightly out of place in a combat environment. Nobody came. At 0724, Marcus radioed exfil. At 0741, the extract helicopter arrived. At 0812, Emily Carter climbed aboard with her rifle case. She sat down. She closed her eyes. She breathed out. The debrief took 4 hours. It was held in the operations shelter with 5 people, a recording system, and a lot of cold coffee. The intelligence officer leading it was a thorough, methodical woman named Captain Lindsay Farrow, who asked her questions in the same order regardless of the answer to the previous one and never showed whether she was surprised or not surprised by what she heard. She was surprised. She showed it exactly once, when Emily gave the range on the RPG shot. 3,180 meters, Farrow said. Approximately. I didn't have a rangefinder on that position. I was working from the topographic data and visual estimation. And you made that shot in thermal conditions. There was a lull window. I waited for it. Farrow looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the transcript of the engagement on the table in front of her. Then she wrote something down. I'll need to have the position verified, she said. Of course. It was verified 2 days later when a team went back into the area as part of a follow-up assessment. The RPG position was confirmed at 3,210 meters from Emily's firing point. The East Ridge sniper position was confirmed at 2,855 meters. The discrepancy between those numbers and Emily's estimates was, in each case, within the margin of visual estimation error. Farrow's report noted, without editorial comment, that both shots represented the longest confirmed kills in the theater's current operational record. The previous record had been held for 6 years by a British Army sniper at 2,740 meters. Nobody made a formal announcement. Nobody issued a press release, but the reports circulated, as reports do, and the numbers spoke for themselves. There was a second part of the report that received less attention but was, in some ways, more significant. It was Farrow's observation that the pre-mission intelligence provided by the sniper element, specifically the identification of the East Ridge position and the anomalous sand disturbance on the eastern approach, had materially altered the outcome of the engagement. Had the team entered the funnel as originally planned, the simultaneous fire from the compound, the formation shooters, and the Ridge sniper would have created a crossing engagement with minimal cover and no exit. Farrow's assessment, written in the flat language of official reporting, estimated that without the deviation from the original route, casualties among the SEAL element would have been probable. The word probable did not appear in the report summary. It appeared in a footnote. Nobody made a formal announcement about the footnote either, but it circulated, and some of the men who read it sat very quietly for a while afterward, doing math they hadn't known they needed to do. The shot at 3,210 meters was not supposed to be possible, not under those conditions. Not with that equipment. Not without rangefinders, without wind computers, without the kind of digital integration that current long-range precision shooting leaned on as a matter of course. Devlin sat in the operations shelter for a long time after the debrief, looking at the topographic display, running the numbers in his head the way you run numbers you've run before but gotten a different answer on. He'd been shooting at this level for 4 years. He understood what the variables were at extreme range. He understood what thermal deviation did to a bullet's trajectory. He understood, at a gut level, what the limits were. The limits didn't match what had happened today. He thought about what she'd said in the briefing before the op. The words he'd stopped listening to, the specific numbers, density, altitude, trajectory deviation, Coriolis correction at this latitude that she'd recited without notes, without hesitation, in the flat tone of someone describing something obvious. He hadn't heard expertise. He'd heard a 19-year-old girl talking too much. He sat with that for a while. He was not the kind of man who apologized easily. That wasn't ego, or not entirely. It was more that he held himself to a standard that made apologies complicated. If you admitted you were wrong about something, you had to account for why you'd been wrong, and accounting for it meant looking at the process that had generated the wrong conclusion. That was uncomfortable work. He looked at the topographic display for another 10 minutes. Then he went to find her. She was cleaning the rifle when he found her. The helicopter pad was empty at this hour, and she'd set up at the edge of it with the rifle broken down on a clean cloth, moving through the process with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. She didn't look up when his footsteps approached. She'd heard them from 30 meters. "Carter," he said. "Devlin." He sat down on the concrete barrier beside her and looked out at the desert. It was evening now, and the light was doing the thing that desert light did in the late afternoon, turning everything gold and rust and amber, making the harsh landscape briefly, surprisingly beautiful. The sand that had been brutal and indifferent at 0400 was now glowing like something heated from inside. He didn't say anything for a while. She didn't fill the silence. She kept working on the rifle. "I owe you an apology," he said eventually. She paused what she was doing. Not for long. Then she kept going. "You don't have to," she said. "Yeah, I do." He looked at his hands. "I stopped listening before you finished. That was I was being." He stopped. It was bad practice. Especially before an op. She looked at him for the first time. He was sitting with his forearms on his knees, not performing humility, just sitting with it. "You don't know me," she said. "You didn't have reason to trust me. I had the same reason to trust you that I have to trust anyone on a team before they've proven themselves. You were there. You'd been vetted. That should have been enough." He met her eyes. "It wasn't. And then you." He stopped again, shook his head. 3,200 meters. "In those thermals, 3,210, she said mildly. "According to the verification team." He almost smiled. Almost. "How did you do it?" She thought about how to answer. The honest answer was long and involved a dead man's training methods, and 600 Saturday mornings, and a small notebook full of handwritten calculations, and a specific quality of attention that she wasn't sure she could explain because she'd had it her whole life and had never been without it. The short answer was simpler. "I waited for the right moment," she said. "And I trusted what I knew." He nodded. Said nothing for a while. "Your father's rifle?" She glanced down at the components laid out on the cloth. "His action, my barrel, his chamber spec. He trained you." "Everything I know." She picked up the barrel section and began to clean the bore. He said ego was the thing that made you miss. That it made you hurry. Made you think you already had the answer. Devlin was quiet for a moment. "He was right," he said. Marcus Hale found them both there 20 minutes later. He stood at the edge of the pad and watched them for a moment. Devlin sitting on the barrier, Emily cleaning her rifle, the desert going gold behind them, and felt something settle in his chest that he recognized as relief, but was also something adjacent to it. Something like correction. Like the recalibration that happened when a piece of information you'd been carrying wrong finally resolved into the right shape. He sat down on Emily's other side. She glanced at him. "Kept cleaning. Watts is stable," he said. "They got fluids into him. He'll be medevac to Ramstein tomorrow." "Good," she said. He looked out at the desert for a moment. The sun was almost at the horizon. The shadows from the western ridge were long and cool. "I want to say something," he said. She waited. "When you told me about the ridge sniper before the op started, I heard you. I logged it. But I didn't change anything. I kept moving on the same route." He paused. "That was wrong. You gave me actionable intelligence, and I treated it like a maybe. You couldn't confirm it," she said. "Neither could you. But you were more confident than I gave you credit for." She didn't respond to that directly. She reassembled the rifle barrel and seated it with a precise quarter turn. "My father used to say she started, then stopped." "What?" She fitted the bolt. "He used to say that the most dangerous moment in any engagement isn't when things go wrong. It's the moment just before, when you're about to make the decision that determines whether things go wrong." She looked at the assembled rifle. "You have to be very still in that moment. Very honest. You have to hear everything, even the things that are inconvenient to hear." Marcus sat with that. The desert was going quiet the way it went quiet at dusk, not silent, never silent, but the sound shifted register, became lower, more interior. The wind from the north had dropped to almost nothing. Somewhere in the distance, a vehicle engine rose and faded. "We're going to do this again," he said finally. "Different mission. Different terrain, probably. But the same kind of thing." "Yes," she said. "I want you to keep telling me what you're seeing. Even if I push back. Even if it slows us down. I want you to say it anyway." She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but opening, like a scope coming into focus. "Yes, sir," she said. He nodded. Then Devlin, without preamble or segue, said, "How old were you when you made your first shot past 1,000 meters?" Emily Carter considered the question. 13, she said. "But my father said it doesn't count before 15 because you don't have the patience yet." A pause. "I think he was right." Devlin said nothing. But he didn't look away. The desert kept burning for another hour. The three of them sat at the edge of the helicopter pad. As the last light went out of the sky and the stars came on one at a time, sharp and cold at this altitude, the kind of sky that made the day's heat feel like a rumor. Nobody told any stories. Nobody made any grand statements. The rifle was clean, the mission was complete, and 42 kilometers to the northeast, in a dried riverbed that a topographic map called irregular terrain, the sand was slowly, patiently reclaiming the evidence of what had happened there. The wind had shifted again. Southwest now, warm and dry. Emily Carter felt it on her face and noted the temperature and filed it away in the part of her mind that was always collecting data, always building the next calculation, always preparing for the next moment when the wind would matter, and the patience to read it would be the difference between everything and nothing. She said nothing. She looked at the stars. 2 weeks later, in the operations shelter during a standard mission briefing, Marcus Hale set up the topographic display and ran through the threat assessment and the route and the timeline and the exfil sequence. He went through all of it in the same flat economical language he always used. At the end, he paused. "Carter," he said, "tell me what you see." She walked to the display. She studied the topographic lines, the satellite overlay, the wind history data in the upper corner. She traced the ridgeline on the eastern approach. She noted the shadow angles, the known water sources, the vegetation clusters that indicated subsurface moisture and therefore soft ground. She talked for 3 minutes. Nobody looked at their boots. Nobody muttered. Nobody stopped listening before she finished. When she was done, Marcus looked at the team. "Devlin," he said. "Comments?" Devlin looked at the map. "I'd move the overwatch position 40 meters north. The angle's slightly better and the heat shimmer off the western rock won't be a factor in the early morning window." Emily nodded. "Agreed. I'll account for the revised position in my dope sheet." Marcus looked at both of them. "Good," he said. "Let's go to work." Nobody laughed. Nobody had laughed since the helicopter came back. Some lessons are written in sand, and the desert reclaims them. Some lessons are written in something that doesn't wash away. Outside, the wind was blowing from the northwest at 9 kilometers per hour. Emily Carter already knew. She'd known since she woke up. In the second week of June, in a small house in Flagstaff, Arizona, a man with one hand sat in a kitchen chair and listened to a phone call. When it was over, he set the phone down on the table and looked at the window for a long time. Outside, the desert was bright and still. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He already knew what his daughter was. He'd always known. The rifle on the wall behind him, the original, the one before the modifications, the one he'd carried through 11 years and 2 theaters and more early mornings than he could count, caught the light from the window and held it. He looked at it for a while. Then he stood up, slowly, the way a man of 61 with a damaged inner ear stands up carefully, with awareness, and went to the window. The Sonoran stretched out below the ridge behind his house, heat already building even at this hour. He'd looked at that view for 23 years. He knew every rock formation, every wash, every place where the sand shifted differently depending on the wind direction. He thought about a Saturday when Emily was 13. The shot she'd made that he'd said didn't count. Technically, he'd been right at 13. The patience wasn't fully there, and the patience was the thing that made the shot repeatable. A one-time performance wasn't what he'd been building toward. He'd been building towards someone who could make the shot twice, 10 times, 100 times, under conditions that got progressively worse. He thought she could probably make it 100 times now. He put his good hand flat against the window glass and felt the warmth coming through it. "Good girl," he said, very quietly, to nobody in particular. Outside, the desert kept its silence. It always did.